The autumn wind cut through Eliza Morgan's thin cotton dress like a blade as she stood on the platform of the Abilene train station in Kansas. One hand pressed against her swollen belly, and the other clutching an empty carpet bag that contained nothing but a broken hairbrush and a faded photograph of her dead mother. The year was 1878, and she had exactly 3 cents to her name, not even enough for a cup of coffee, let alone passage to anywhere that might offer her refuge from the shame that followed her like a shadow. She had been standing there for 2 hours, watching passengers come and go, wondering if she should just lie down on the wooden planks and wait for the cold or hunger to take her, when a tall man in dusty leather chaps and a weather-beaten hat stopped directly in front of her and said in a voice that was rough but somehow gentle, "You look like you could use some help, miss." Eliza looked up into a face that was tanned from years under the relentless prairie sun, with lines around the eyes that suggested he smiled often, though he was not smiling now. His eyes were a startling shade of blue, like the sky just before sunset, and they held something she had not seen in a long time, genuine concern. She opened her mouth to tell him she was fine, that she did not need charity, but her stomach chose that moment to growl so loudly that several people on the platform turned to look. Heat flooded her cheeks, and she pressed her hand harder against her belly, feeling the baby kick as if in protest of their situation. "I am fine, sir," she managed to say, though her voice came out weak and unconvincing. "I am just waiting for someone." The cowboy looked at her for a long moment, his gaze taking in her worn dress, her lack of luggage, the way she was swaying slightly on her feet. Then he looked down at her belly, and she saw his jaw tighten. When he looked back at her face, there was something fierce in his expression that made her take a step back. "No, you are not," he said flatly. "You are pregnant and alone, and you have been standing here long enough that I watched you from across the street for the last 20 minutes, and nobody has come for you. Now, I am not going to leave a woman in your condition out here to freeze or starve, so you have got 2 choices. You can come with me to my ranch where you will have a warm bed and hot food, or you can keep standing here lying to yourself and to me about being fine. But I am not leaving until you make the right choice." Eliza felt tears prick at her eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. She had cried enough in the past 6 months to last a lifetime. She had cried when Thomas Bellamy, the merchant's son who had promised to marry her, had instead disappeared in the night after she told him about the baby. She had cried when her landlady had thrown her out of her boarding house in St. Louis for being an unwed mother. She had cried on the train west when she realized she had nowhere to go and no one who cared whether she lived or died. But she would not cry in front of this stranger, no matter how kind his eyes were. "You do not know me," she said, lifting her chin with what little pride she had left. "Why would you help me?" The cowboy removed his hat, revealing dark brown hair that was slightly too long and curled at the ends. He held the hat against his chest and looked at her with such sincerity that she felt something crack inside her carefully constructed walls. "My name is James Callahan," he said. "I own a cattle ranch about 10 miles north of here. I lost my wife 3 years ago in childbirth along with our baby daughter. I know what it is like to feel helpless and alone, and I know that if Sarah were here, she would never forgive me for walking past a woman in need, especially one carrying a child. So I am asking you, please let me help you. No strings attached. You can stay as long as you need, and when you are ready to move on, I will help you do that too. But right now, you need food and rest, and I can provide both." Eliza stared at him, searching his face for any sign of deception or ulterior motive, but all she saw was honest compassion. She thought about her options, which were essentially non-existent. She could refuse his help and likely die on this platform within a few days, taking her innocent baby with her. Or she could trust this stranger and at least give her child a fighting chance at life. "My name is Eliza Morgan," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "And I am 6 months along. I have no money and no family and nowhere else to go, If you are truly offering help, then I would be grateful for it, though I do not know how I will ever repay you." James put his hat back on and picked up her pathetic carpetbag before she could protest. "You can repay me by taking care of yourself and that baby," he said. "Now come on, my wagon is just over there. It is a bit of a ride to the ranch, but I have got blankets and I will get you home before dark." The word home hit Eliza like a physical blow. She had not had a home since her mother died 2 years ago, leaving her alone in the world at 18 with nothing but a small inheritance that had been quickly eaten up by living expenses. She had thought Thomas would be her home, her future, but he had proven to be nothing but a liar and a coward. Now here was this stranger, this cowboy named James Callahan, offering her something she had thought she would never have again. She did not know if she could trust it, but she was too tired and hungry and desperate to refuse. She followed him to a sturdy wagon hitched to 2 strong horses. He helped her up onto the seat with a gentleness that surprised her, given how rough and calloused his hands were. Then he tucked a thick wool blanket around her legs and climbed up beside her, taking the reins with practiced ease. As they pulled away from the station, Eliza looked back at the platform where she had been standing, feeling as though she were leaving behind the last remnants of her old life. Everything that had happened before this moment, all the pain and shame and fear, seemed to fade into the distance as the horses carried them north along a well-worn road. She did not know what awaited her at this ranch or what kind of man James Callahan truly was, but for the first time in months, she felt a tiny flutter of something that might have been hope. The ride took nearly an hour, and during that time, James told her about his ranch. He ran about 200 head of cattle with the help of 3 ranch hands who lived in a bunkhouse on the property. His main house was modest but comfortable, with 3 bedrooms and a kitchen that had been his wife's pride and joy. He grew some vegetables in a garden behind the house and kept chickens for eggs. He spoke matter-of-factly about his life, not trying to impress her or make it sound better than it was, and Eliza appreciated his honesty. She, in turn, told him a carefully edited version of her own story. She had been engaged to a man in St. Louis who died unexpectedly, she said, leaving her alone and pregnant with no means of support. It was not entirely a lie. Thomas was dead to her, but she could not bring herself to admit the full truth of her abandonment. Not yet. Maybe not ever. James listened without judgment, his eyes on the road ahead, and when she finished, he simply nodded and said, "Well, you are safe now. That is what matters." The sun was beginning to set when they crested a small hill, and Eliza saw the ranch spread out before them. The main house was a sturdy 2-story structure made of whitewashed wood with a wide porch that wrapped around the front and one side. Behind it stood a large red barn, a smaller bunkhouse, and various outbuildings. Cattle dotted the surrounding pastures, dark shapes against the golden grass, and smoke rose from the chimney of the main house, suggesting someone had kept the fire going. "It is not much," James said, sounding almost apologetic, "but it is home." To Eliza, who had been homeless for weeks, it looked like paradise. As they pulled up to the house, 3 men emerged from the barn, clearly curious about the unexpected visitor. James helped Eliza down from the wagon and introduced her to his ranch hands. There was Sam, a grizzled man in his 50s with a gray beard and kind eyes. Miguel, a young man from Mexico with a ready smile and quick hands. And Robert, who was somewhere in between in age, quiet and watchful. James explained that Eliza would be staying with them for a while as his guest, and that she was to be treated with respect and courtesy. The men all nodded and tipped their hats to her, and if they had questions about her situation, they were polite enough not to ask them. James led her inside the house, and Eliza felt her breath catch in her throat. The interior was clean and well-maintained, with simple furniture that was clearly built to last. The main room served as both a parlor and dining area, with a large stone fireplace that was already crackling with a welcoming fire. Through a doorway, She could see a kitchen with a cast-iron stove and shelves lined with preserves and dry goods. A staircase led to the second floor, where James said the bedrooms were located. "You will take the room at the end of the hall," he said, leading her upstairs. "It has got the best light and the most privacy. I sleep in the room on the other end, and the middle room is just storage right now. There is a washroom downstairs off the kitchen with a tub if you want to clean up, and I will have Miguel heat some water for you. But first, let me show you where you will be sleeping." He opened the door to a room that was small but comfortable, with a brass bed covered in a colorful quilt, a dresser with a mirror, and a window that looked out over the pastures. It was simple and clean, and to Eliza, it was the most beautiful room she had ever seen. "This was going to be the nursery," James said quietly, and she could hear the pain in his voice. "But it never got used for that. I figure it is time it served the purpose it was meant for, helping a child come into the world." Eliza turned to him, and this time she could not stop the tears from falling. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much. I do not know why you are doing this, but I will never forget your kindness." James looked uncomfortable with her gratitude, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "You do not need to thank me," he said gruffly. "Just make yourself at home. I will go get that water heated up for you, and then I will make us some supper. I am not much of a cook, but I can manage a decent stew." He left her alone then, and Eliza sat down on the edge of the bed, running her hands over the soft quilt. The baby kicked again, more insistently this time, and she placed both hands on her belly, feeling the movements of the tiny life inside her. This child had been conceived in lies and false promises, but it was still innocent, still deserving of love and care. And now, thanks to a stranger's compassion, it would have a chance to be born in safety and warmth. Eliza allowed herself to cry then, really cry, for the first time since she had boarded that train in St. Louis. She cried for everything she had lost, for the future she had thought she would have, for the naivety that had led her to trust a man who did not deserve it. But she also cried with relief, because for the first time in so long she did not feel completely alone. There was still fear, still uncertainty about what would come next, but there was also this moment of grace, this unexpected kindness from a cowboy who had every reason to walk past her but chose not to. When her tears finally subsided, she washed her face in the basin on the dresser and smoothed down her hair as best she could. Then she went downstairs to find James in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up and hands covered in flour as he attempted to make biscuits to go with the stew that was simmering on the stove. He looked so earnestly focused on his task that Eliza felt a smile tug at her lips despite everything. "Can I help?" she asked from the doorway. James looked up, a streak of flour on his cheek. "I thought you might want to rest," he said. "I have been resting on that train for days," Eliza replied. "I would rather be useful if you do not mind. Besides, I am a fairly good cook, and it looks like you could use some assistance with those biscuits." James looked down at the lumpy dough in front of him and laughed, a warm sound that seemed to fill the kitchen. "I will not argue with that," he said, stepping aside. "Sarah always said I could burn water if I was not careful." They worked together in comfortable silence, Eliza salvaging the biscuit dough and shaping it into proper rounds while James stirred the stew and set the table. It felt strange and intimate at the same time, this domestic scene with a man she had met only hours ago, but there was nothing improper about it. James was respectful and careful not to crowd her, and Eliza found herself relaxing in a way she had not thought possible. When the meal was ready, they sat down at the rough-hewn table and ate. The stew was simple but hearty, filled with beef and vegetables, and the biscuits turned out golden and flaky. Eliza ate more than she had in days, feeling strength returning to her body with each bite. James watched her with quiet satisfaction, refilling her bowl without being asked. "How long have you been ranching?" she asked between bites, wanting to fill the silence with something other than the clink of spoons against bowls. "All my life, I suppose," James said, leaning back in his chair. I grew up on a ranch in Texas, learned everything from my father. When I was 22, I came up here to Kansas to start my own place. That was 6 years ago now. Met Sarah a year after I arrived, married her within 6 months. We had 3 good years together before. He trailed off, his expression darkening. You do not have to talk about it if you do not want to, Eliza said softly. James shook his head. No, it is all right. It has been long enough that I can talk about it without falling apart. Sarah was pregnant. Everything seemed fine, but when her time came, there were complications. The baby was turned wrong, and by the time we got the doctor here from town, it was too late for both of them. I held my daughter for about 5 minutes before she stopped breathing. We buried them together in the cemetery plot on the far side of the property. Eliza reached across the table without thinking and placed her hand over his. I am so sorry, she said. That must have been unbearable. James looked at their joined hands, and for a moment neither of them moved. Then he turned his hand over so their palms were touching, and he gave her fingers a gentle squeeze before pulling away. It was, he said simply. But life goes on, whether we want it to or not. I threw myself into the ranch, worked myself half to death for a while, but Sam and the others made sure I ate and slept and did not do anything too stupid. They are good men. And eventually, the pain dulled to something I could live with. I still miss Sarah every day, but I have learned to keep going. They finished their meal in a silence that was thoughtful rather than uncomfortable. When the dishes were cleared and washed, James showed Eliza the tub in the washroom and left her with heated water, soap, and a clean towel. She locked the door and undressed slowly, catching sight of herself in the small mirror on the wall. Her body had changed so much in the past months, her belly round and full, her breasts heavy and tender. She looked like a woman, not the girl she had been when she first met Thomas. The hot water felt like heaven against her sore muscles, and she soaked until the water began to cool, washing away days of travel, grime, and fear. When she finally climbed out and dried herself off, she realized she had nothing clean to wear. Her only other dress was barely any better than the one she had taken off. She stood there wrapped in the towel, wondering what to do when there was a soft knock on the door. Miss Eliza, James called from the other side. I found one of Sarah's old nightgowns. I washed it and left it on the chair outside the door. I thought it might fit you better than what you have got. Eliza felt her throat tighten with emotion again. Thank you, she called back, listening to his footsteps retreat before she cracked the door open and grabbed the nightgown. It was soft white cotton with delicate embroidery around the collar, clearly made with care and love. She pulled it over her head, and though it was a bit tight around her belly, it fit reasonably well. It smelled like lavender and sunshine, and wearing it felt like being wrapped in someone else's memories. When she emerged from the washroom, she found James sitting by the fire in the main room, staring into the flames. He looked up as she entered, and something flickered in his eyes before he quickly looked away. It suits you, he said quietly. Sarah would have been glad to know it was being put to good use. Eliza sat down in the chair across from him, tucking her feet under the nightgown. Tell me about her, she said. If you want to, I mean. What was she like? James was quiet for a long moment, and Eliza thought he might not answer. But then he began to speak, his voice low and warm with affection. Sarah had been a schoolteacher's daughter, educated and proper, but with a wild streak that had drawn him to her immediately. She loved to ride horses and was not afraid of hard work. She had a laugh that could light up a room and a stubborn streak a mile wide. She believed in always doing the right thing, even when it was difficult, and she never turned away anyone in need. As James talked, Eliza began to understand why he had stopped to help her at the train station. He was not just being kind out of his own nature, he was honoring the memory of a woman who had believed in compassion and generosity. It made Eliza respect both of them more, this man and the wife he had lost. She sounds like she was wonderful, Eliza said when he finally fell silent. You must have loved her very much. I did, James agreed. I still do, I suppose, but she is gone and I am still here and I have got to figure out how to keep living. That is what she would have wanted. They sat together by the fire until Eliza began to yawn, exhaustion finally catching up with her. James noticed immediately and stood, offering her his hand to help her up. "You should get some sleep," he said. "You have had a long day and you need rest. If you need anything during the night, my door is open. Do not hesitate to wake me." Eliza nodded and made her way upstairs, her legs heavy with fatigue. She crawled into the soft bed and pulled the quilt up to her chin, feeling the baby settle inside her as if it too was ready for rest. Through the window, she could see stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky, more stars than she had ever seen in the city. She fell asleep counting them, feeling safer than she had in months. Over the next few weeks, Eliza settled into a routine at the ranch. She woke early and helped James prepare breakfast, insisting that she earn her keep despite his protests that she was a guest. She found that she enjoyed cooking for the ranch hands, who were always appreciative and polite. Sam had a particular fondness for her biscuits, and Miguel would often bring her wildflowers from the prairie as thanks for her meals. James was careful to maintain a respectful distance, always mindful of propriety. He never entered her room without knocking, never touched her except to help her up or down from the wagon when they went into town for supplies. But Eliza began to notice small things about him that made her heart beat a little faster. The way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. The gentleness in his rough hands when he helped her. The sound of his laughter when Sam told a particularly bad joke over dinner. She tried to push these feelings away, telling herself she had no business thinking of James that way. She was pregnant with another man's child, a woman with a shameful past. James was a good man who was simply being kind, honoring the memory of his late wife. There could never be anything between them beyond this temporary arrangement, but her heart seemed determined not to listen to her head. One morning in late October, about 3 weeks after her arrival, Eliza woke to find frost coating the windows and a chill in the air that spoke of approaching winter. She dressed in one of the dresses that James had quietly purchased for her on their last trip to town, telling her gruffly that she needed warm clothes, and he would not hear any arguments about it. The dress was simple dark blue wool that accommodated her growing belly, and it made her feel almost respectable again. She went downstairs to find James already in the kitchen, stoking the fire in the stove. He looked up as she entered, and she saw concern in his eyes. "The weather is turning," he said without preamble. "We are going to have our first real cold snap in the next day or two. I want to make sure you have everything you need before it hits. Extra blankets, warm clothes, whatever you might be missing." "I am fine," Eliza assured him, though the thought of a harsh winter made her nervous. "You have already given me so much," James frowned, crossing his arms over his chest. "Eliza, you are 7 months pregnant now. Winter in Kansas is no joke. I need to know that you are going to be warm and safe, especially as you get closer to your time. Have you thought about what you want to do when the baby comes? About whether you want to stay here or move on?" Eliza felt her stomach clench with anxiety. She had been trying not to think about the future, focusing only on getting through each day, but James was right to bring it up. She could not stay here forever, imposing on his kindness. At some point, she would need to make a plan for herself and her child. "I do not know," she admitted, sinking into a chair at the table. "I have been trying to figure that out. I thought maybe I could find work in Abilene, perhaps as a seamstress or a cook. But I know it will be difficult with a baby, especially without a husband." James pulled out a chair and sat down across from her, his expression serious. "I have been thinking about that too," he said, "and I have a proposal for you if you will hear me out." Eliza looked at him warily, not sure what to expect. "All right," she said slowly. James took a deep breath, as if steeling himself for something difficult. "You could stay here permanently," he said. "Not as a guest or a charity case, but as my wife. It would be a marriage of convenience, purely practical." You and your baby would have a home and security, and I would have help running the house and maybe some company in the evenings. We would not have to pretend to be in love or anything like that. It would just be two people helping each other out." Eliza stared at him, too stunned to speak. Of all the things she had expected him to say, a marriage proposal was not one of them. Her mind raced with 1,000 thoughts at once. It was a practical solution to her problems, certainly. As James's wife, she would have a place in society again, and her child would have a name and a future. But could she really enter into a loveless marriage, even one as kind and reasonable as James was proposing? "Why would you do that?" she asked finally. "You barely know me, and I am carrying another man's child. Why would you want to tie yourself to that?" James met her eyes steadily. "Because it is the right thing to do," he said simply. "Because I have more than I need and you have nothing, and Sarah would have wanted me to help you. Because that baby deserves a father, even if I am not the one who made it. And because, honestly, I am tired of being alone in this house." "I am not asking you to love me, Eliza. I am just asking you to stay." Eliza felt tears welling up again, but this time they were not tears of despair or relief. They were something more complicated, a mixture of gratitude and sadness and something else she was afraid to name. She thought about her options, which were still essentially non-existent. She could refuse James's offer and try to make it on her own in Abilene, but the reality was that an unwed mother would be shunned by most respectable employers. She and her baby would likely end up destitute or worse. Or she could accept this marriage, give her child a chance at a decent life, and try to build some kind of future here on this ranch. "Can I think about it?" she asked quietly. "I do not want to give you an answer without being sure." James nodded, relief evident in his expression. "Of course," he said. "Take all the time you need. The offer stands regardless. But Eliza, you should know I am not proposing this out of pity. You have become a part of this place in the short time you have been here. The house feels more like a home with you in it. Sam and the others feel the same way. Whatever you decide, you will always have friends here." Eliza managed a watery smile. "You are a good man, James Callahan," she said. "Better than I deserve." "That is not true," James said firmly. "You deserve every happiness, Eliza. And if I can provide even a little of that, then I will count myself lucky." They left the conversation there for the moment, both of them needing time to process what had been said. Eliza went about her day in a daze, mechanically preparing meals and doing light chores while her mind turned over James's proposal again and again. She watched him throughout the day, seeing him in a new light. He was patient with the ranch hands, firm but fair. He worked harder than any of them, never asking someone to do something he would not do himself. And he was unfailingly kind to her, always making sure she was comfortable, always checking if she needed anything. That evening, as they sat together by the fire after supper, Eliza found herself studying him more openly. He was reading a book, his face relaxed in the firelight, and she realized with a start that she found him handsome. Not in the polished, refined way that Thomas had been handsome, but in a rugged, honest way that felt more real. His hands were scarred from years of hard work, his face weathered by sun and wind, but there was a strength to him that made her feel safe. As if sensing her gaze, James looked up from his book and met her eyes. For a long moment they just looked at each other, and Eliza felt something shift between them, some barrier beginning to crack. "I will do it," she said suddenly, the words tumbling out before she could second-guess herself. "I will marry you, James, if the offer is still open." James closed his book slowly, his expression carefully neutral. "Are you sure?" he asked. "I do not want you to feel pressured or obligated." "I am sure," Eliza said, and she realized it was true. This might not be the fairy tale romance she had once dreamed of, but it was real and solid and safe. James was offering her a future, and more importantly, he was offering her child a father. That was worth more than any passionate declarations of love. "You have been nothing but kind to me from the moment we met. You have given me a place when I had nowhere to go. I would be honored to be your wife, James, even if it is just a practical arrangement." James stood and crossed to where she sat, kneeling down beside her chair so they were at eye level. He took her hand in his grip warm and steady. "Then we will go into town tomorrow and see the preacher," he said. "We will do this right and proper. And Eliza, I promise you, I will do everything in my power to make sure you and your baby are safe and happy. That is my vow to you, even before we speak any official ones." Eliza squeezed his hand, feeling a sense of peace settle over her. This was the right choice. She did not know what the future held, but at least she would not be facing it alone anymore. The next day dawned clear and cold, and James hitched up the wagon for the trip into Abilene. Eliza dressed in her best dress, the dark blue wool, and pinned up her hair as neatly as she could. She looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back at her. She was older than she had been 6 months ago, hardened by experience and loss, but there was also a determination in her eyes that had not been there before. She was going to survive this. She was going to build a life for herself and her child, and she was going to do it with dignity. James was waiting for her at the bottom of the stairs, dressed in his Sunday best, which consisted of a clean shirt, a black vest, and trousers without any visible stains or holes. He had trimmed his hair and shaved, and Eliza was struck again by how handsome he was. He offered her his arm and she took it, letting him help her out to the wagon. The ride into town was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. When they arrived at the small white church on the edge of Abilene, James helped her down and led her inside. The preacher, a kindly older man named Reverend Thomas, greeted them warmly and listened as James explained the situation. If the Reverend had any judgments about Eliza's pregnant state or the hasty nature of the marriage, he kept them to himself. Instead, he simply nodded and said he would be happy to perform the ceremony. They stood together in front of the altar, with the Reverend's wife and the church caretaker serving as witnesses. The ceremony was brief and simple. No flowers or music or fancy words, just two people promising to stand by each other for better or worse. When the Reverend pronounced them man and wife, James leaned in and pressed a chaste kiss to Eliza's cheek, his beard scratching slightly against her skin. "Thank you," he whispered in her ear, so softly that only she could hear, "for trusting me." Eliza felt her eyes sting with tears, but she blinked them back and managed a smile. "Thank you for saving me," she whispered back. They signed the marriage certificate, making it official, and then James took her to the general store and insisted on buying her a simple gold wedding band. It was not expensive or fancy, but it fit perfectly on her finger, and Eliza found herself staring at it in wonder as they drove back to the ranch. She was married. She was Mrs. James Callahan now. It felt surreal and overwhelming and terrifying all at once. When they arrived back at the ranch, Sam and Miguel and Robert were waiting on the porch, and it was clear that James had told them what was happening. They congratulated the newlyweds warmly, and Miguel produced a bottle of whiskey that he had been saving for a special occasion. They all drank a toast to the new Mrs. Callahan, and Eliza felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the tiny sip of whiskey James had allowed her. That night, after the celebration had died down and the ranch hands had returned to the bunkhouse, Eliza and James stood in the hallway upstairs, suddenly awkward with each other. They were married now, legally bound, but nothing had really changed between them. James was still sleeping in his room at one end of the hall, and Eliza was still in hers at the other end. "I meant what I said," James told her, his voice low. "I am not expecting anything from you beyond what you are willing to give. Your room is yours, and you have all the privacy you need. This is a partnership, Eliza, not a traditional marriage. I want you to feel comfortable here." Eliza nodded, grateful for his consideration even as a small part of her felt a strange disappointment. "Good night, James," she said softly, "and thank you for everything." "Good night, Eliza," he replied, and they went to their separate rooms. As Eliza lay in bed that night, her hand resting on her belly, she thought about the strange turn her life had taken. Just a month ago, she had been alone and desperate on a train platform, ready to give up. Now she was married to a good man, living on a ranch in Kansas, with a future that seemed at least somewhat secure. It was not the life she had imagined for herself, but perhaps it was the life she was meant to have. The baby kicked, and Eliza smiled in the darkness. Whatever else happened, her child would have a home. That was what mattered most. The winter came on hard and fast, just as James had predicted. Snow fell in thick, heavy flakes, blanketing the prairie in white and making travel difficult. Eliza spent most of her days inside, cooking and sewing and preparing for the baby's arrival. James had cleared out the storage room and set up a cradle in there, along with a dresser for baby clothes and a rocking chair that had belonged to his mother. Eliza found herself spending hours in that room, folding and refolding the tiny garments that she had sewn from fabric James brought home from town, imagining what it would be like to hold her baby in her arms. As the weeks passed, she and James settled into a comfortable routine. They ate meals together, sat by the fire in the evenings, and talked about everything and nothing. James told her stories about growing up in Texas, about the wild horses he used to chase, and the cattle drives he went on with his father. Eliza told him about her childhood in Ohio, about her mother who had been a talented pianist and her father who had died when she was very young. They shared memories and dreams, and slowly, carefully, they became friends. But Eliza could not deny that her feelings for James were growing into something more than friendship. She found herself looking forward to his return each evening when he came in from the day's work. She loved the way he smiled at her over breakfast, the way he always made sure she had the warmest seat by the fire, the way he would rest his hand on her back when he passed behind her chair. These small gestures of care and affection were more precious to her than any grand romantic declaration. She thought James might be developing feelings for her too, though he never said anything. Sometimes she would catch him watching her with an expression that was almost tender, but he would always look away quickly, as if afraid of overstepping. They were both being so careful with each other, so respectful of the boundaries they had set, that neither of them knew how to acknowledge what was growing between them. Christmas came and went, a quiet affair with just the ranch hands and the two of them. James gave Eliza a beautiful shawl made of soft wool, perfect for keeping her warm during the cold winter nights. She gave him a pair of leather gloves that she had spent weeks making in secret, carefully stitching each finger. He seemed genuinely touched by the gift, putting them on immediately and flexing his fingers with a smile. As January arrived and Eliza entered her 8th month of pregnancy, she became more uncomfortable and less mobile. Her back ached constantly, and she could not find a comfortable position to sleep in. James noticed her discomfort and began helping her with more and more tasks, insisting that she rest while he prepared meals or cleaned up. She protested at first, feeling useless, but he was firm. "You are growing a whole human being in there," he said, pointing at her belly. "That is more work than anything else we are doing around here. Let me take care of you, Eliza. That is what husbands are supposed to do." So she let him care for her, and she found that she liked it. She liked having someone worry about her, someone who made sure she was comfortable and safe. Thomas had never done any of that. He had been charming and attentive when he wanted something from her, but he had never truly cared for her the way James did. One evening in late January, as they sat by the fire, Eliza felt a particularly strong kick from the baby. She gasped and pressed her hand to her belly, and James immediately looked up in alarm. "Are you all right?" he asked, half rising from his chair. "Yes, the baby is just very active tonight," Eliza said with a breathless laugh. "Here, feel this." Without thinking, she reached for James's hand and placed it on her belly where the baby was moving. She felt him stiffen, and she realized what she had done, how intimate the gesture was. She started to pull his hand away, embarrassed, but he stopped her. "Wait," he said softly, his eyes wide with wonder. "I can feel it. The baby is really moving." They sat there together, James's hand pressed against her belly, feeling the miracle of life stirring within. Eliza watched his face, seeing the emotions play across it, awe and joy and something that looked like grief. She knew he must be thinking of his own child, the daughter he had lost before she could really live. "I am sorry," she said quietly. "This must be difficult for you." James looked up at her, his blue eyes bright with unshed tears. "No," he said. "Do not apologize. This is beautiful, Eliza. This baby is a gift, and I am honored that you are letting me be a part of this. I wish Sarah could be here to see it. She would have loved you, you know. She would have been so happy to have a friend, someone to share all of this with." Eliza felt her own tears starting to fall. "I wish I could have known her," she said. "She must have been an amazing woman to have inspired such love and loyalty." "She was," James agreed. He moved his hand in a gentle circle on her belly, soothing the baby's movements. "But you are pretty amazing yourself, Eliza Callahan. You are strong and brave, and you have been through so much, but you keep going. I admire that about you." It was the most openly affectionate thing James had ever said to her, and Eliza felt her heart swell. Without thinking, she reached up and cupped his cheek with her hand, feeling the roughness of his beard against her palm. "James," she whispered, not sure what she was going to say, but knowing she needed to say something, he covered her hand with his, turning his head slightly to press a kiss into her palm. It was a simple gesture, barely even romantic, but it sent a shiver through Eliza's entire body. She saw the same awareness in James's eyes, the same recognition that something was changing between them. But before either of them could say anything more, the baby kicked again, hard enough to make Eliza wince. James immediately pulled back, concern replacing the tenderness in his expression. "Are you sure you are all right?" he asked. "Should I get the doctor?" "No, I am fine," Eliza assured him, even though her heart was racing for reasons that had nothing to do with the baby. "The baby is just letting us know it is there." They separated then, going back to their respective chairs, but something had shifted between them. The air felt charged with possibility, with unspoken feelings that were becoming harder and harder to ignore. That night, as Eliza lay in bed, she admitted to herself what she had been trying to deny for weeks. She was falling in love with James Callahan. Maybe she had been falling in love with him since that first day at the train station when he had looked at her with such genuine concern. He was everything Thomas had not been, honest and kind and true. He kept his promises. He cared about her well-being. He made her feel safe and valued and wanted, but she did not know if James felt the same way. He had proposed a marriage of convenience, nothing more. He had been clear that he was not expecting love or romance. And she was still pregnant with another man's child, still carrying the evidence of her mistakes. How could someone like James truly want her that way? She fell asleep with these thoughts churning in her mind, unaware that in his own room down the hall, James was lying awake with similar questions. He had not expected to develop feelings for Eliza when he brought her home. He had genuinely thought this would be a practical arrangement, a way to help someone in need while easing his own loneliness. But somewhere along the way, she had become so much more than that. He loved the sound of her laughter, rare as it was. He loved the way she hummed while she cooked, old songs from her childhood that she probably did not even realize she was singing. He loved her strength and her resilience, the way she had taken a terrible situation and found a way to survive it with dignity. He loved the way she looked in the morning with her hair down around her shoulders, soft and vulnerable. He loved her kindness to the ranch hands and the way she had made his house feel like a home again. But he was terrified of telling her any of this. She had been hurt so badly by the man who had gotten her pregnant and then abandoned her. She had trusted someone who betrayed that trust in the worst possible way. How could James tell her he loved her without making her feel pressured or trapped? Their marriage was supposed to be on her terms, a safe haven where she could raise her child without fear. He did not want to ruin that by burdening her with his feelings, so they both lay awake in their separate rooms, loving each other in silence, too afraid to speak the truth. February brought more snow and bitter cold. The ranch work became harder, with frozen water troughs and cattle that needed extra feed to survive the harsh weather. James was out longer each day, coming home exhausted and half frozen. Eliza fussed over him, making sure he had hot coffee and warm food, scolding him when he tried to go back out before he had properly warmed up. "You are going to catch your death out there," she said one evening as he prepared to head back out for a final check on the cattle. "I will be fine," James assured her, pulling on the gloves she had made him. "I just want to make sure everyone is settled for the night. Then I am coming with you," Eliza said, reaching for her shawl. James spun around, his eyes wide with alarm. "Absolutely not," he said firmly. "You are 8 months pregnant, Eliza. You are not going out in this weather." "I am not going to stand here and watch you work yourself to death," Eliza shot back, her own stubborn streak emerging. "If you are going out, then I am too. I can at least help with the barn work." They stared at each other, neither willing to back down. Finally, James sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "Fine," he said, "but you stay in the barn where it is warm and you do not lift anything heavy." "Agreed, agreed," Eliza said, wrapping her shawl around her shoulders. They went out together into the freezing night, and Eliza helped James feed the horses and check on the cattle in the barn. She enjoyed working alongside him, feeling useful and needed. James kept glancing over at her, clearly worried, but she ignored his concerned looks and focused on her tasks. As they were finishing up, Eliza reached up to grab a feed bucket from a high shelf. She stretched too far, her balance thrown off by her pregnancy, and she started to fall backward. James caught her before she could hit the ground, his arms coming around her from behind, one hand cradling her belly protectively. They froze like that. Eliza pressed back against James's chest, his arms wrapped around her. She could feel the rapid beating of his heart against her back, could hear the harsh sound of his breathing in her ear. Slowly, carefully, he turned her around in his arms so they were facing each other. "You scared me," he said, his voice rough. "Please be more careful, Eliza. I could not bear it if something happened to you." Eliza looked up into his face, seeing the raw emotion there. "James," she whispered, "I need to tell you something." "What is it?" he asked, his hands still resting on her waist. She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I know this was supposed to be a practical marriage," she said. "I know we agreed there would be no expectations or obligations beyond helping each other, but I need you to know that my feelings have changed. I have feelings for you, James. Real feelings. I do not want this to be just a practical arrangement anymore." James stared at her, his expression unreadable. For a long moment he said nothing, and Eliza felt panic rising in her chest. She had made a terrible mistake. She had ruined everything by admitting her feelings. He was going to pull away, going to tell her that he still loved his dead wife and could never feel that way about her. But then, slowly, a smile spread across James's face, so full of joy and relief that it took her breath away. "Thank God," he said, and then he was kissing her. It was nothing like the kisses Thomas had given her, demanding and selfish. This kiss was tender and careful, asking permission even as it gave affection. James cupped her face in his hands like she was something precious, his lips moving against hers with a gentleness that made her want to cry. Eliza kissed him back, her arms going around his neck as much as her belly would allow, pouring all of her feelings into that single perfect moment. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard, their breath forming clouds in the cold air of the barn. "I love you, Eliza," James said, resting his forehead against hers. "I have loved you for weeks now, maybe even since that first day at the train station. I have been terrified to tell you, afraid of scaring you away or making you feel obligated, but I love you. Not out of pity or charity, but because you are smart and strong and beautiful and you make me want to be a better man. I love you." Eliza felt tears streaming down her cheeks, but for once they were tears of pure happiness. "I love you too," she said. "I never thought I could feel this way again after Thomas, after everything that happened. But you showed me what real love looks like, James. You showed me what it means to be truly cared for. I love you so much." They kissed again and then again, making up for all the weeks of careful distance and unspoken feelings. Finally, James pulled back and laughed, a sound of pure joy. "We should get back inside before we both freeze," he said, "and we have a lot to talk about." They walked back to the house hand in hand, and that night, for the first time, James came into Eliza's room. They lay together on top of the quilt, fully clothed but wrapped in each other's arms, talking and kissing and planning their future. James made it clear that he understood they could not be intimate in the traditional way while she was pregnant, and he did not expect that. He just wanted to hold her, to be close to her, to finally acknowledge what was between them. "When the baby comes," he said, pressing a kiss to her forehead, "I want to adopt it legally as my own child. I want to give it my name and raise it as my son or daughter, no questions asked. That baby will never know anything except that it is loved and wanted." Eliza's throat tightened with emotion. "You would do that?" she whispered. "Of course I would," James said. "I already think of that baby as mine, Eliza. I have been waiting to meet him or her for months now. The biology does not matter. Love is what makes a family, not blood." They fell asleep like that, Eliza's head resting on James's chest, his arms wrapped protectively around her and their unborn child. It was the first time Eliza had slept through the night in months, feeling safe and loved and completely at peace. From that night on, everything changed. They still slept in Eliza's room, finding it easier to stay together in the larger bed. James was endlessly patient and gentle with her, helping her when her back ached, rubbing her swollen feet, and making sure she was always comfortable. They talked about their future, about the life they wanted to build together. James wanted more children eventually if Eliza was willing, and she found that she wanted that too. She wanted to fill this house with love and laughter, to give her baby siblings and create the family she had always dreamed of. The ranch hands noticed the change in their relationship immediately, and they were clearly pleased. Sam said it was about time James stopped moping around and acted like a man in love. Miguel gave them his blessing with a huge grin, and Robert, who rarely spoke, simply nodded and said, "Good. You are both happy now." In early March, just as the worst of the winter was starting to break, Eliza woke in the middle of the night with a sharp pain in her belly. At first she thought it was just more of the practice contractions she had been having for weeks, but then she felt a gush of warm liquid and realized her water had broken. "The baby was coming. James," she said, shaking him awake. "James, it is time." He was up instantly, all traces of sleep vanishing from his face. "Are you sure?" he asked. "Very sure," Eliza gasped as another contraction hit, stronger than the first. James moved with swift efficiency, helping Eliza into a clean nightgown and then running to wake Sam, who rode into town to fetch the doctor. James stayed with Eliza, holding her hand and talking to her in a low, soothing voice as the contractions grew stronger and closer together. The doctor arrived just after dawn, a competent older woman named Dr. Sarah Mitchell who had delivered half the babies in the county. She examined Eliza and declared that everything was progressing normally, then sent James out of the room despite his protests. "This is women's work, doctor." Mitchell said firmly, "You can pace in the hallway if you need something to do." The labor was long and difficult, lasting well into the afternoon. Eliza had never experienced such pain, wave after wave of it that seemed never-ending. But every time she thought she could not bear it anymore, she heard James's voice through the door, talking to her, encouraging her, telling her how strong she was and how much he loved her. It gave her the strength to keep going. Finally, just as the sun was beginning to set, Eliza gave one last push and heard the most beautiful sound in the world, her baby's first cry. Dr. Mitchell quickly cleaned the infant and wrapped it in a soft blanket, then placed the squirming bundle in Eliza's arms. "Congratulations, Mrs. Callahan," she said with a warm smile. "You have a healthy baby boy." Eliza looked down at her son, this tiny, perfect human that she had carried for 9 months, and felt her heart overflow with love. He had a shock of dark hair and tiny fists that waved in the air, and when he opened his eyes, they were a deep blue-gray that might change or might stay that color. He was beautiful and perfect and hers. "Can James come in now?" she asked Dr. Mitchell. The doctor nodded and opened the door, and James practically burst into the room. He stopped short when he saw Eliza holding the baby, his eyes going wide with wonder. "Come meet your son," Eliza said softly. James approached slowly, as if afraid he might break the spell, and sat down carefully on the edge of the bed. Eliza shifted the baby so James could see him better, and she watched as this strong, tough cowboy melted into complete adoration. "He is so small," James whispered, reaching out to touch the baby's tiny hand. The infant immediately wrapped his fingers around James's much larger one, and James let out a choked laugh. "Look at that, he is already strong. He is perfect," Eliza agreed. "I was thinking we could name him William after my father, William James Callahan. What do you think?" James looked up at her, his eyes bright with tears. "I think that is a perfect name," he said. "Hello, William. Welcome home, son." They sat together like that for a long time, the three of them, while Dr. Mitchell quietly cleaned up and then left with instructions for Eliza's care. Sam and the other ranch hands peeked in to offer their congratulations, but they kept their distance, sensing that this was a private family moment. Over the next few weeks, Eliza recovered from the birth while James took on the role of father with enthusiasm. He was up with her during the night feedings, changing diapers without complaint, and walking the floor with William when the baby was fussy. He sang to him in a low, rumbling voice cowboy songs and lullabies that he remembered from his own childhood. Eliza fell even more in love with him watching him with their son, because that was what William was, their son. Not hers, not some other man's, but theirs together. James had made that clear from the moment William was born, and he never wavered from it. He filed the adoption papers as soon as he could get into town, making William legally his child in every way that mattered. As spring arrived and the prairie began to turn green again, life on the ranch settled into a new rhythm. Eliza was stronger now, able to take on more of the household duties while also caring for William. James continued to run the ranch with help from Sam and the others, but he always made time for his family. They would sit together in the evenings, William sleeping in the cradle nearby, and talk about their plans for the future. "I want to expand the herd," James said one night. "Maybe add another 100 head. With the railroad here now, we can ship cattle east and make a better profit. That money could go toward improving the house, maybe adding on another room or two." "For more children?" Eliza asked with a smile. James grinned and pulled her closer. "Eventually, yes. If you want them, but there is no rush. William is enough for now." But as the months passed and William grew from a tiny infant into a curious baby, Eliza found herself wanting another child. She wanted to experience pregnancy and childbirth with James as a true partner from the beginning, not just at the end. She wanted to give William a sibling, someone to grow up with and share the ranch with. She broached the subject with James on a warm summer evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. William was asleep inside, and they had a rare moment of quiet together. "I have been thinking," she said, leaning against James's shoulder, "about having another baby." James turned to look at her, his expression carefully neutral. "Are you sure?" he asked. "William is only 6 months old. You do not have to rush into anything, Eliza. We have all the time in the world." "I know," Eliza said, "but I want to. I want to have your baby, James. A child that is yours from the very beginning. I want to share that experience with you." She saw the emotion flash across his face before he pulled her into a tight embrace. "I would love that," he said, his voice rough. "I would love that more than anything." So they began trying for another baby, and their marriage became truly complete in every way. James was a tender and considerate lover, always putting Eliza's comfort and pleasure first. She felt cherished and desired in a way she never had before, and she marveled at how different this physical intimacy was when it was based on love and trust rather than empty promises. It took a few months, but by the time winter returned, Eliza was pregnant again. This time, there was no fear or shame, only joy and anticipation. James was overjoyed, already planning for the new addition and making sure Eliza did not overexert herself. William was walking now, a chubby toddler who followed his father everywhere, and the thought of giving him a sibling filled Eliza with happiness. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because Eliza was not stressed or alone. She had James by her side every step of the way, and she had a home and security that made all the difference. She felt the baby move and grow, and she marveled at the miracle of creating life with the man she loved. In June of 1880, Eliza gave birth to a healthy baby girl with James's blue eyes and her own dark hair. They named her Sarah after James's first wife, because Eliza wanted to honor the woman who had shaped the man she loved. James cried when Eliza suggested the name, holding his newborn daughter with infinite tenderness. "Sarah would have loved you," he told Eliza as they lay together in bed, their new daughter sleeping between them. "She would have loved both of you, you and this little Sarah." "Thank you for this gift, Eliza. Thank you for giving me a family again." Eliza smiled and kissed him softly. "Thank you for giving me a life worth living," she said. "Thank you for stopping at that train station 2 years ago. Thank you for saving me." "We saved each other," James said, and it was true. The years that followed were full of joy and hard work and love. William and Sarah grew into bright, energetic children who loved the ranch and the freedom of the prairie. James expanded the cattle operation just as he had planned, and the ranch prospered. They added on to the house, building more bedrooms and a larger kitchen, because 2 years after Sarah was born, Eliza delivered twin boys, Thomas and Samuel, named after her father and Sam, the ranch hand who had become like family to them. Eliza had never imagined she could be this happy. She had gone from being pregnant and penniless on a train platform to being the wife of a successful rancher, the mother of 4 beautiful children, and the mistress of a home filled with love and laughter. She thought sometimes about that desperate girl she had been, alone and terrified, and she wished she could go back and tell her that everything would be all right, that a blue-eyed cowboy would save her and give her a life beyond her wildest dreams. James was everything she could have asked for in a husband and partner. He was patient with the children, teaching them to ride and work with cattle as they grew older. He was affectionate with Eliza, never letting a day go by without telling her he loved her and showing her with 1,000 small gestures. He had kept every promise he made to her, and then he had given her so much more. On a cool autumn evening in 1885, almost exactly 7 years after the day they met, Eliza and James sat together on the porch swing he had built, watching the sun set over their land. The children were playing in the yard, their laughter carrying on the wind. William, now 7, was helping little Sarah build a tower out of blocks while the 4-year-old twins ran in circles around them, full of endless energy. "Do you ever regret it?" Eliza asked suddenly, the question coming out of nowhere. "Taking me in that day. Your life would have been so much simpler if you had just walked past me at that station." James turned to look at her, his expression serious. He cupped her face in his hand, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "Not for a single second," he said firmly. "You and these children are the best thing that ever happened to me, Eliza. You brought life back into this house and into my heart. I was just existing before you came along, going through the motions, but you taught me how to really live again. You gave me a reason to wake up every morning with a smile. You gave me a family and a future. How could I ever regret that?" Eliza felt tears well up, but they were happy tears. "I love you so much, James Callahan," she said. "I never knew I could be this happy. I never knew life could be this good." "I love you too," James said, pulling her close and kissing her deeply. "Always have, always will." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching their children play, grateful for the twist of fate that had brought them together. Eliza thought about all the hardships she had endured, all the pain and fear and loss, and she realized that it had all led her to this moment, to this life, to this family. She would not change a single thing because every difficult step had brought her home. As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, James called the children inside for supper. They rushed up the porch steps in a tumble of noise and excitement, and Eliza herded them toward the kitchen, laughing as the twins tried to race each other to the table. This was her life now, chaotic and messy and absolutely perfect. After supper, when the children were finally asleep in their beds, Eliza and James sat by the fire one last time before heading to their own bed. James had his arm around her shoulders, and Eliza rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "You remember what you said to me that day at the train station?" she asked. "The very first thing you said," James thought for a moment, then smiled. "I said you looked like you could use some help." "And then you said I was coming home with you," Eliza reminded him. "You did not ask, you just told me that I was coming home. I thought you were so presumptuous at the time, but you were right. I was coming home, I just did not know it yet." James pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "This was always meant to be your home," he said. "You were always meant to be mine, and I was always meant to be yours. It just took a train station and a bit of courage to make it happen." "And a very stubborn cowboy who would not take no for an answer," Eliza added with a laugh. "That too," James agreed, grinning. They went to bed that night wrapped in each other's arms, two people who had found unexpected love in the most unlikely circumstances. Eliza fell asleep thinking about how grateful she was for every moment, every hardship, every twist of fate that had led her to James. She had been pregnant and penniless at a train station, desperate and alone, and he had said, "You're coming home with me." And he had meant it. He had given her a home, a family, a future, and most importantly, he had given her his love. The years continued to pass in a blur of seasons and milestones. William grew into a fine young man who had his father's work ethic and his mother's compassion. He eventually took over much of the ranch management, working side by side with James to expand their operation even further. Sarah became a teacher, just like James's first wife had been, and she opened a small schoolhouse on the ranch property to educate not just her younger brothers, but also the children of the neighboring ranchers. The twins, Thomas and Samuel, were inseparable and full of mischief, but they were good boys with big hearts. They loved working with the cattle and horses, and they could often be found racing across the prairie on horseback, whooping with joy. James taught all of his children to ride and rope and work hard, but he also taught them to be kind, to help those in need, and to never judge someone based on their circumstances. Eliza became known throughout the county as a woman of grace and generosity. She never forgot what it was like to be desperate and alone, and she made it her mission to help other women who found themselves in difficult situations. She offered shelter to unwed mothers, helped widows find work, and always had a hot meal for anyone who came to her door. James supported her in this wholeheartedly, proud of his wife's compassionate heart. In 1895, on their 17th wedding anniversary, James surprised Eliza with a gift. He led her out to the cemetery plot where Sarah and their baby daughter were buried, a place that Eliza had helped him maintain over the years, always making sure there were fresh flowers on the graves. But this time, there was something new, a beautiful marble marker that had been commissioned from a stonecutter in Kansas City. The inscription read, "Sarah Callahan, beloved wife and mother, and baby Callahan, forever in our hearts. Your love lives on in the family you inspired." Below that, James had added a personal message. "Thank you for sending Eliza to me. She has loved your memory as her own, and she has given me a life full of joy. Rest in peace, knowing your legacy lives on." Eliza stood there with tears streaming down her face, overcome with emotion. After all these years, James was still honoring his first wife, but he was also acknowledging everything that Eliza had brought to his life. It was a perfect gesture, one that showed how much he understood her and valued her. "I wanted you to know," James said, taking her hand, "that loving you does not diminish what I felt for Sarah. And loving Sarah's memory does not take anything away from what I feel for you. You are both part of my story, part of who I am. But Eliza, you are my present and my future. You are the love of my life, now and always." Eliza turned to him, cupping his face in her hands. They were both older now, with silver threading through their hair and lines on their faces that spoke of years of laughter and tears. But James's eyes were still that same startling blue, still looking at her with the same love and devotion he had shown her from the very beginning. "I love you, James Callahan," she said. "Thank you for choosing me that day. Thank you for giving me a chance when no one else would. Thank you for loving me and our children, and for building this beautiful life with me. I am the luckiest woman in the world." They kissed there in the cemetery, surrounded by memories of the past and the promise of the future. Two souls who had found each other against all odds and built something lasting and true. As they walked back to the house hand in hand, they could see their grandchildren playing in the yard. William had married a sweet girl named Margaret, and they had given James and Eliza 3 grandchildren so far, with another on the way. Sarah was courting a young lawyer from Abilene, and wedding plans were already being discussed. The twins were still young and wild, but Eliza had no doubt they would eventually settle down and find their own happiness. The ranch was thriving, the family was healthy and happy, and Eliza's heart was full to overflowing. She thought again about that desperate young woman at the train station, alone and terrified, with nothing but a baby in her belly and 3 cents in her pocket. She wished she could reach back through time and tell that girl that everything would be all right, that a miracle was about to walk into her life in the form of a blue-eyed cowboy with a kind heart and strong hands. "What are you thinking about?" James asked as they reached the porch. "About miracles," Eliza said, smiling up at him, "and about how blessed I am." James pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "We are both blessed," he said, "but I think I am more blessed than you are because I got you." They stood there together, watching the sun set over their land, their children and grandchildren laughing and playing around them. This was the life they had built, the family they had created, the love they had nurtured over nearly 2 decades. It had started with a desperate plea for help and a cowboy's compassionate heart, and it had grown into something beautiful and enduring. Years later, when they were both old and gray, sitting on that same porch swing and watching yet another generation of Callahan children running through the yard, Eliza would think back to that autumn day in 1878, when James Callahan had stopped in front of her at the train station and changed her life forever. She would remember the fear and desperation, but also the hope that had sparked in her chest when he had said, "You're coming home with me." And she would smile because she had indeed come home, not just to a house or a ranch, but to a life full of love and purpose and belonging. She had found her place in the world, not through her own efforts, but through the kindness of a stranger who had seen past her circumstances to the person she truly was. James would catch her smiling and would squeeze her hand, and they would sit together in comfortable silence. 2 people who had weathered every storm and celebrated every joy together. Their love had started as a practical arrangement, a marriage of convenience, but it had blossomed into something far more precious. It had become a partnership built on mutual respect, shared values, and deep, abiding affection. It had become the kind of love that inspired stories, the kind of love that lasted a lifetime. As the sun set on their lives together, casting golden light over the land they had worked so hard to build and protect, Eliza squeezed James's hand back and whispered, "Thank you for saving me." And James, his voice still strong despite his years, whispered back, "Thank you for letting me love you." They had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances, a pregnant woman at a train station and a lonely cowboy with a compassionate heart. But they had built something extraordinary together, a love that had stood the test of time, a family that would carry on their legacy for generations to come, and a home that had become a beacon of hope and kindness for everyone who knew them. And when they finally passed on, many years later within months of each other because neither could bear to be without the other for long, they were buried together on that same plot of land, their headstone reading simply, James and Eliza Callahan, beloved husband and wife, cherished parents and grandparents. They found each other when hope seemed lost, and they built a legacy of love that will never be forgotten. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren would gather at that grave site for years to come, telling the story of how it all began. They would talk about the pregnant woman at the train station who had nothing, and the cowboy who had everything he needed but chose to share it anyway. They would talk about love that transcends circumstances, about compassion that changes lives, and about the power of choosing kindness when it would be easier to look the other way. And every time the story was told, it would end the same way, with a reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary love stories begin in the most ordinary moments, with a simple act of kindness from a stranger who sees someone in need and says, without hesitation, "You're coming home with me." Because in those 5 words, James Callahan had not just offered Eliza shelter, he had offered her hope, dignity, and the chance at a future she never could have imagined. And Eliza, by accepting his offer, had given him the chance to love again, to open his heart to the possibility of happiness after loss, and to build a family that would be his greatest legacy. Their love story became legend in that part of Kansas, a tale told to remind people that redemption is always possible, that love can be found in the darkest moments, and that sometimes the family you choose is even stronger than the family you are born into. The Callahan Ranch continued to thrive for generations, a testament to the strong foundation that James and Eliza had built, not just in terms of land and cattle, but in terms of love, compassion, and unwavering commitment to each other and to their community. And so the story ends not with tragedy or loss, but with a legacy of love that continues to inspire and endure, a reminder that one moment of courage and compassion can change not just 2 lives, but the lives of everyone those 2 people touch. James and Eliza Callahan had started with nothing but hope and determination, and they had built an empire of love that would stand the test of time. Proof that the best love stories are the ones where 2 imperfect people find each other at exactly the right moment and choose, every single day, to build something beautiful together. Their story was complete, a circle that had begun with a desperate plea and a cowboy's kind heart, and had ended with a legacy of love that would never be forgotten. And somewhere, perhaps, in whatever comes after this life, James and Eliza were together still, holding hands and smiling, grateful for every moment they had been given, and for the extraordinary journey that had begun with 5 simple words at a train station in Abilene, Kansas, on an autumn day in 1878.